This is The Great Outdoors with Jason White, exploring the great outdoors in Pennsylvania and beyond. Brought to you by the Mariana Outdoorsmen Association and by Wild Acres Farm, Fishery, and Regulated Hunting Grounds. Now, The Great Outdoors with Jason White.
Good morning to our listening audience. As you notice from the voice, this is not Jason White. I have the honor of filling in for Jason today. He has a prior commitment. My name is Darrell Becker. I'm the president of the Fayette County Farm Bureau, and I think we have a great show lined up today. We have two guest speakers to talk about soil, and one of them is Justin Bracketrich, the agronomist from Penn State, and the other one is Pierce Wilson from the Soil Conservation District. Welcome, gentlemen. And I'm going to kind of step out of the way and let you guys start the roll.
Darrell, it's good to be back here. I know we were here just a couple weeks ago talking about some items we had here in the county for rent and some of the stuff that the Conservation District does. When you'd reached out to me and then Justin, we had the conversation about, what could we talk about on the next possible show here. And I think that Justin and I got a couple good talking points here. The time of year that we're working with, it's hay season's right here, right now. I know getting across the county, we've seen some guys have been out, chopping haulage and doing some things like that. We're right at the prime time here to start getting some hay off if we get the weather to be conducive with that. Justin, what do you think? I think spring's looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, so we've had a really nice spring weather heat units wise, right? Maybe not always favorable for us as far as moisture has gone when we wanted to be planting or wanted to be doing something else. But when we think about the amount of temperature units and heat that we've had to really push our grasses and make things grow, we're really far along. I mean, we should be thinking about making hay, whether that's baleage or haylage or dry hay, which can be a challenge in mid-May. But all of that is really where we should be thinking right now. And that kind of gets challenging this time of year for people, especially if you're row cropping as well as if it's dry. Am I planting? Am I making hay? What's most important? But I think this is a great opportunity for us to take a little time and talk about some practices associated with hay and how we can improve those.
Right. And I know just like with our own practices at home, it always laugh because it's always the last 10 days of May. You're in April and you're getting some ground worked. If you're doing tillage, you're getting some stuff burned off. If you're doing no-till and you're trying to get lime spread and getting top dressing some fertilizer, and you start thinking about like, okay, I want to, these couple days I want to work on planting corn. If you're putting beans, I want to do this. Then I'm going to get into hay. Then I'm going to do this.
Right, yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like, okay, now we're going to take all those things that I wanted to do, so many days of this and so many days of that, and do it respectively, that now we're going to do all three of those things at the same time.
And we're going to throw 5 days of rain in there on top of it, right? So everything gets truncated even more.
So what's the old line? The best laid plans of mice and men often goes astray.
Right. So you're always trying to find this perfect balance of what am I doing today, and one of the things that often suffers is our hay. And when we think about that from the component of the animal, is the longer the hay sets, the taller it gets, the stemmier it gets. And the quality factor of that is the digestibility of it, the protein content. A lot of that starts to go down. And so as we keep kicking that can down the road, supplementation becomes more of a process, the thickness of that hay. So there's a lot to that, right, of not making good, timely hay when we probably should be.
Right. And one of the things that I think we should talk about today, we're going to talk about a process called baleage. For those of you that aren't real familiar on these agronomic practices, when you drive across the county, if you see the round bales that are wrapped in white plastic, as we always say, like the marshmallow bales, that's actually the process of doing that is when you harvest hay, you would mow it one day, and we're going to base this on a primarily grass ration. Now, if you were making alfalfa or clover, it's a little bit different, but on a standard, 80% seeding, 20% legume mix, you're going to mow it one day, you're going to bale it the next, you're going to bale it with that. And Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, that 50 to 55% moisture. There's a window in there anywhere from, it depends on who you talk to, and it depends on what nutritionist you talk to, and what agronomist you talk to, what nutritionist you talk to, what farmer that's fed it you talk to. But there is a window with it. We try to target. I know for us, when I make it, I try to shoot between that 45 to 55%, where basically it's wilted on top and a little damp underneath. You bale it. The baler has to have the capability of doing it. It has to be what they call a silage baler. You bale it at that point, and then you hurry up and you wrap it. And what you're doing is you're trapping any oxygen to entering the bale so it can go through a fermentation process. So when that bale is wrapped in plastic, you've created an anaerobic environment, and it makes a silage-based feed. So one of the things about it is, what I like for it is it does take the window out of that traditional 3 to 4 days to make hay, because you can mow it one day and bale it the next. So if you know you only got 2 days of dry weather to be on the ground, you can go after and get it done. The feed value is exceptional with it because your digestibility increases with lower lignin contents. Lignin is a binder in the plant. The longer and the more mature, like orchard grass and timothy and those things get to be, they have nutritional value, but they're a little harder for a ruminant to digest, because you have to remember, like ruminants, especially cattle, dairy cattle or beef cattle, are going to do all their digestion through a rumination process through their stomach.
So that's a wonderful overview of baleage itself, right? So one of the things that we've really focused a lot on through extension in our education and hay workshops is this interest in this transition to people focusing on wrapped bale, haylage, baleage, whatever you really want to call it, because of a lot of the things that you mentioned, right? There's that. The biggest driver, I think, right now that I see to that is what you mentioned about rain. And Daryl, when we started, we were talking about not being so attached to the weather and not having to have that temperature. Well, regardless of what we think and what temperatures we're getting, in May, the humidity is high. Right?
Absolutely.
And you can't get hay. And so when we talk, Pierce did a great job kind of outlining the moistures of baleage. But when we think of the moistures of dry hay at 12, 15%, when your ambient humidity is 80%, it is nearly impossible to get that dry hay that you've got that's really heavy and really leafy with wet ground underneath of it down to 12, 15%, right? And so that is where I see this wonderful thing fitting in the system, is that first cut.
Listen, for me, the greatest purchase that I've made since I've been farming has been a wet, dry baler, because now I'm not a captive to the weather. And I guess if you really want to get to the bottom line, the cows love it. And contented cows chew more hay and make more milk if you're a dairy farmer, and it's just good for the cows.
Right, and we transitioned. This will be our 10th season that we started making baleage hay on our farm. When we made the transition, I had talked to a nutritionist who was working with us a little bit just on some mineral programs and picking his brain. One of the things on our farm is we background our calves, so I don't generally sell the calves right off the cows in the fall. So I'm trying to get them to a yearling weight or more of a value-added product. We're raising some bulls, some replacement heifers. When we were doing it with dry hay, when we first went that direction with it, we were right around about a 5 pound a head per day grain, dry grain with the hay, in a feed ration. And the nutritionist at the time said, you can take 3 pound of that. He said, you can take 3 pound of that grain out per head, and you're gonna see an increase in your overall gain. And I said, I doubt that. And he said, try it. Mm-hmm. And man, oh day, have we knocked off a lot of the feed price of buying a prepared feed, or even if you're growing your own grain and grinding it. I mean, you're feeding less. You're feeding that much less. You put a group of 25 or 30 feeder cattle together, and you start taking 100, close to 100 pounds of feed a day out. That's a big deal. And supplementing with the baleage.
Yep, absolutely.
So one thing I want to add, immediately before we go on, though, is this is quality hay that we're wrapping.
Well, exactly.
So there was this big thing that happened when we started doing this wrapped hay, though, that we had to back up, right? Is we can't bale 80% milkweed and hemp dogbane and broom sedge and wrap it up in this beautiful plastic and then now all of a sudden have this wonderful forage, right? If it's not great going in, it's going to be not great once we take it out. And so we can't, what we're allowed to do is maybe instead of having to cut today, it can maybe go a week longer, right? And we can extend ourselves out, or we can not worry about that rain. This does not give us the excuse to be a terrible manager, right?
Correct.
We still cannot not. We still have to have a fertility program. We still have to have some sort of a weed management,
Absolutely.
whether that's cultural or mechanical or through a pesticide. We still have to be very cognitive of what we're doing. We're just improving the quality of something we're already making.
And to add to that, one of the beauties of this about getting this hay at a prime or earlier time is your mechanical management of curbing the broadleaf weeds you don't want. Is you're getting them at a perfect time of maybe when they're just, if you do have a field that has some, it's problematic with some broadleaf weed, you're catching them at a time. A lot of broadleaf weeds have some digestibility factors to them and have some nutritional factors when they're at a certain size. And I think that's, a lot of times.
Diversity is important. I mean, that
yes, and that's why you don't see some of those weeds in a pasture because, cattle and sheep and goats, they're eating those weeds at the time when they're little. The problem is a lot of times those little weeds, once they bolt and get bigger,
they ain't touching them.
They're not touching them.
Nope, you're right.
So one thing is, and that's the beauty of it, is getting that hay cut earlier, is you're breaking the cycle up of letting that plant bolt and make a seed head. But Justin's absolutely right. You can't, if you go out and you're trying to make quote unquote like road mulch hay and trying to bale it,
right,
it's not going to work. And one other thing to add to that, we talk about this with the rain, and yes, it's wet hay because it's wet because it's got natural moisture, plant moisture in it. It's not because we mowed it today and then we caught the front of a storm and we get 1.5 inches of rain dumped on it and then we want to hurry up and bale it because it's had a bunch of rain added to it that it's going to make a feed. That's the other thing, is that it doesn't, it's just because it's natural plant moisture we're looking at is the moisture that's added. You don't want a bunch of rain. You don't want it to be rained on multiple days. You're going to lose a lot of your value very quickly.
The greatest thing about this is it gives the farmer more options. You're not stuck in a rut with only being able to bale if you got 3 or 4 days of good weather. So it's some, if you're not doing it, it's something to consider.
Right, absolutely.
And this is not some sort of a plug for us as a baleage. We're not in the pocket of big baleage, right? We're not saying this is what you need to do because, I mean, truthfully, for a robust herd health, you need that dry hay as well, too, right? And what we're advocating for is, just like Daryl said, this is another option you have when you feel like your back's against the wall and you need to make good hay, or you're feeling like more in Pierce's situation where you can reduce some input costs or you can reduce some of that grain. This is just another opportunity that someone didn't have 30 years ago to do better on their farm, and something everyone should be looking at and considering as a way to just save some money because every year gets a little tighter.
Am I thinking wrong and also thinking that the advantage to this is when you're taking that first cut off, you're giving that second cut a chance to grow early and maybe no, yes, no?
So I have like 3 soapbox things as an agronomist, right? And I'll try to keep this one somewhat tamped back. But even as a kid, what I remember is like, well, we can't cut first yet. We got to wait for this other undergrowth to come in, right?
Yeah.
Well, the undergrowth's your second cut, right? And so that's the thing, is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in that situation, that if you keep pushing off first cut over and over and over, your first cut is now your first and second. Yeah. And your second is now your third, and you're just taking and taking and taking. Whereas exactly what you're saying is we can take that first cut early, we can take it now, we can get it off. We can then let that thing release. We can get that really nice, beautiful vegetative second cut that we're wanting for that really nice phase feeding, where they're in that third trimester or they're in that milking phase. We have that great lush green hay. That's what the name of the game is, right?
Bingo.
It is second good quality hay that we're really after, not just cutting for quantity.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think another avenue on that is, too, when you're getting that done earlier and you're not backing your times up, you could cut and especially around here, like in a primarily grass stand that's managed with some top dressing and some fertilizer and your pHs are right. When we talk about pHs being right, we're looking in them at like the low to mid 6s on grass hay. I mean, it's going to get you the most mobility and nutrient, and your P and K levels that are semi-adequate or supplementing that with some type of top dress fertilizer, you're getting to the point where you're going to make a first cutting and a second cutting, and then you can make if you get enough yield off of that, you can make the determination when you get into fall if you're going to leave that lay over for the winter, if you're going to cut it again. I mean, because sometimes we're going in there and we're taking those cuttings because we're looking at it from a yield standpoint.
You have to think of the grass too, right?
You have to
That's what
think of the
you're
grass
saying.
too, right?
Yep.
Because you can really start to deplete your potash levels and stuff over time by really pulling away. So, like I said, I think getting some of that second cut made a little earlier in this, and when we say earlier, if the weather holds out and we have rain when you need it, you can make hay starting anytime like now between now and the end of the month on your first cutting. That second cutting ought to be ready, end of July, beginning of August, sometimes even middle of July if we get enough rain. So you can be catching that at an opportune time to make it.
Yep. So I want to jump back to what you just mentioned about some nutrients, right? We've kind of talked about the baleage, we've talked about the cutting. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've done some talks on like what I feel are the most important nutrients to hay in our hay crop. And one of the biggest ones that we challenge ourselves with here in Western Pennsylvania is sunshine, right? We may not think that as much, but we are incredibly dreary at times. If you've been outside at all this past couple of weeks, you might notice that. But we really struggle sometimes getting sun early in the year. And so that can be one of our biggest limiting nutrients, whether we recognize that or not. The next one that I kind of lump in this category is water. And that can be really too much water, which we've seen at times, or it can be too little, right? And the first two of these are out of our control. But this third one is potassium. I think one of the biggest things that we're doing right now with our grass fields is under-applying potassium and potash, and that was one specifically that you mentioned. We want to go to something like nitrogen, and we want to be applying urea, and we want to be doing a lot of these things because we're going to get a lot of this top growth. But if we can use something like potash and apply some of this potassium, what we're going to get is this better overwintering. We're going to get a really quick, a much more robust tillering and a better spring green up. We're going to start to see this hay coming in much thicker and much more luscious, so that if we do want to make that urea application, there's something there to use it, right? We're not just applying it to this thin kind of spotty stand.
Right, and I'll tell you this, and I know, like, Justin, obviously you look at a lot of soil samples, and I see a lot of soil samples that come in, and we're all guilty of it, and I know Daryl would be in that position, and I'm in that position. Our K levels or potassium levels are low, lower. They're not exactly where I like them. One of the things is, too, in the nature of structures of a lot of the farms in the county, you're not applying any place that I've seen where there's a lot of manure that's been applied. The K levels are generally fairly good. Sometimes maybe they're too good.
Elaborate on why that is.
Well, if you just over apply manure over and over and over again, and you have your phosphorus and potassium levels real high, if it's somewhere in a situation whether you're taking it for a hay crop or you're grazing it at that point, there gets to be some livestock concerns with that. There's definitely some potassium issues. One of the things is cattle or better in a more of a below optimum to just an optimum range of potassium. If they get too much of it, it ties up an immobility of magnesium in the animals, and you can get some onsets of some problems at that point. And by no means am I a veterinarian and not explaining that, but those are things that are pitfalls to watch for. So you can have too much of a good thing. So
I set you up. My question was, why do you see that manure causes high potassium? Sorry. Because I think a lot of people don't make that connection of the feed stuff, right? The wasted hay, the sawdust, the straw, the bedding, whatever you're using. A lot of people don't make the connection that you take a manure sample or you read a book value of what beef manure is.
Right.
It's not super high in some of these things, but what they don't account for is all that wasted hay or whatever they're doing to bed that building.
Right, and then we could get down that rabbit hole too when you start putting some of those foreign material. Or when I say foreign, I'm going to say corn fodder, or straw or sawdust. Then we're going to start to see a carbon to nitrogen ratio issue at some point, where you get that out of whack and you get a nitrogen sink. So you could be applying this urea and trying to get a response level out of it, but the carbon is tying it up so much that it's not releasing and putting it on at that point. So we can talk about this, and I don't want to say that more is better on fertilizer. This is why we soil test, because it tells you what you need.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
Because one thing is, and we'll look at it from a holistic aspect, or I should say from an economic aspect, fertilizer is expensive. Okay, we've had this discussion that the last time we were here, you're hundreds and hundreds of dollars a ton. You need to figure out what you can do with your ton of fertilizer. But the other factor is you can, if your phosphorus and your potassium levels are adequate, don't buy a potassium or phosphorus-based fertilizer. You could go back to something like urea.
Because you're actually doing something bad, not something good.
Correct.
And so, right. I mean, I think that's wonderful thing to think about. I plug soil testing every opportunity I get, right, with Youth Conservation District and me with Extension and Daryl's work with Farm Bureau. There's the economic aspect, there's the environmental aspect, there's the livestock health. There's so many reasons that we could sit and do 45 minutes on just why soil testing makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
But yet there's so many people that don't do it. And I don't understand is the value of a $10 soil test to test a field versus $50 an acre.
Saves you hundreds of dollars. Yep.
It's
right.
Economically, it's a no-brainer if we just put all of that in there. And regardless of what we're talking about, if I'm looking at someone's garden or their fields, almost the first thing out of my mouth is, when did you soil test? Diagnostically, it's like going to the doctor and they say, when was the last time you had your blood work done? Right? Like, that's how we can kind of figure out most any of these problems, and everything kind of functions and builds off of soil testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's important too, especially like working with the Penn State Ag Analytical Science Lab out at University Park. It's important too, when you pull your soil test, they're going to ask you for a 3-year, what your plan is, like what your crop rotation is going to be in 3 years. They're going to ask you what a projected yield is. I think it's good to understand, you want to put realistic yield goals on there. So if we'll use this from a crop standpoint, if you say on the test you want to grow 220 bushel to the acre of corn, the nutrient requirements on that test are going to be much more than saying a person wants to grow 3 ton to 4 ton to the acre of grass hay. So I think you want to make sure you have some realistic numbers and evaluating exactly what you have. Like, understand that if you had a seeding in that maybe 3-4 years ago you planted a seeding that was had alfalfa in it, Timothy, and orchard grass, and 3 years into it, you've got a lot less alfalfa and you've got a lot more orchard grass and Timothy.
Soil's talking to you.
It's not an alfalfa grass mix at that point. It's more of a grass mix, because there's certain things like clover and alfalfa require a lot of potassium, so they're going to require a lot more than what a grass hay stand would establish at that point. So understanding what to put your projected yield at, and I tell producers when they fill that out, like, put realistic goals down on that, especially like if you're doing a new seeding, on a brand new, if you did it in the fall and are cutting it in the spring, or did it in the spring and then cutting it in the fall, like a 2 ton to the acre is pretty normal yield for a new seeding, and then we want to bump that up to 3 to 4 ton of the acre. But a 6 ton of the acre grass seeding is not a realistic goal at that point. We have some limiting factors. Some of our soil capabilities and climate here limit us on that.
There is a little correlation between the first cutting and the second cutting and the health of the plant, and we're talking about best management practices of rotational grazing, because it's kind of the same thing. If you cut too low when you're cutting, you're gonna stunt the plant. If you let the cattle graze it too low, it takes too long to come back. So
exactly.
All these things fit together like hand in glove.
Right, and that kind of brings me in another thing. We're talking about hay management, and grazing management goes hand in hand with this. I mean, we're a big proponent of rotational grazing. We're looking for similar species in a pasture field that you would have in a hay field, and that's one thing that I've seen that I like to promote, is what you're grazing in your pasture ought to be what you're making for hay, as long as it's something good. Now, if you have brambles and and buffalo grass in a pasture or in a hay field, you need to work on that a little bit. You've got some nutrient issues. But if you're making a good quality hay, and when I say a good quality hay, a pretty standard good grass hay mix, for here, that's got some yield to it. It's got some density to it. And you can tell too when you walk into a hayfield, you can look pretty quick. The little nicer, the greener it is. It's better quality. That is one thing about plants in the world in science. You can tell a healthier crop is greener. I mean, that is just a dead giveaway at it. That you should also be planning to, your pastures should be managed the same way. I guess my point is on this. you shouldn't have a rotational grazing system and make 100% alfalfa for everything to feed all winter. It's not. That's not. That's because alfalfa is not a grazing item. If you have alfalfa in a field, cows are most likely inclined to graze around it. Actually, there's been a lot of studies on that. The cattle, will eat it, but it's not. And it serves a purpose. Like I said, we went from this is what we're grazing to feeding something that's maybe twice the value in it. Well, then we're out of whack of how we're feeding the cattle through the year. Keeping cattle consistent, I think, so it's, keeping a consistent ration, and that's the beauty of making good hay and keeping good pasture, is from a whole farm approach for 365 days of the year, you're keeping them balanced about where you need to be.
I think, so from that standpoint, right, the biggest thing that you mentioned there is livestock and consistency. Cows, maybe this is an oversimplification, but from what I've seen, livestock are no different from us, right? They like their routine. They like to do what they like to do, but they like regularity to that. And if that means eating in the same pastures, kind of the same time of day, watch them. And if you're leaving them in these conventional open grazing systems, they're going to be in the same spots almost cyclically, right? So if you leave them in there, they're going to come back and they're going to eat the same spots of grass every 3 days if you give them the opportunity. And
that's just it. In an open system, they're going to hang out near where the water source is, and that's why you'll go to a place and you'll see how degraded around the water source is. It's because they're going to walk, they're going to drink water.
High usage, yeah.
Yeah, yep. And then they're going to just hang around there. So that's why we promote moving them through and managing, leaving that at least 3 to 4 inches of growth on top, because you'll go up to a pasture and say, okay, well, the cows could go another day or two in here, then they'll nub it down a lot closer. It takes a lot longer. For every day past that, 3 to 4 inches down takes that many more days to get to regrowth on.
When you start rotational grazing, don't they talk to you? Because when they're ready to go, they're standing by the gate. They're telling you, hey, it's time to move.
And it's kind of funny because, I've noticed this, growing up, we did somewhat of a rotational grazing where we were on a little longer, where we had X amount of paddocks, so we were still doing it, wasn't continual grazing. And then about 6 years ago, we intensified it, where I'm down to about a 3 to 4 day rotation, depending on what the growth is there. And you'll learn too that we plan that 3 to 5 day or 5 to 7 day rotation. You'll find out that you'll take that and adapt that to make that work for you, because there's going to be some places that are good for 2 days and some places that are good for 6. It's funny though, over the years of doing that, how and I know grazing cattle, how they almost become grass snobs a little bit, because you'll be like, should eat here another day, but they want to go to the fresh leafy stuff, and that's good. I mean, because we're back to where we're grazing, we're taking the cattle from grazing at the dirt. And I go back to cattle, it's what I can relate to. The same with sheep. I know, Daryl, you have sheep, you run your sheep on pasture, correct?
Yep.
And you want to get yourself back up off the earth at this point. You're grazing
because the closer they get to the earth, the more worms they're getting, the more time you're going to spend money worming them. But observation is the key in all of this too, because if you observe your cows, after a while, like you were saying, you get them into this rotational mode, they're going to let you know when they're ready to move, and sometimes it's better to listen to them than to make your own plan.
Exactly. A lot of times, you start paying attention. I mean, you always want the cattle to work for you, but every now and again you got to work for them and realize that hey, they need this.
Good point.
It's like putting minerals out or feeding salt. You can tell if they don't. Minerals, a mineral program I think is really important. And this time of year, and this is where this ties in, very, very lush grasses will constitute them going through some minerals and looking for salt at that point, and their mineral uptake right now is very heavy. I noticed it much greater that they're hitting the minerals a lot harder right now than they would be during a dry period in the winter, where they're just on a drier hay, where they're just kind of maintaining. But they're flushing through their system pretty quick, and I think that goes from all aspects of livestock. It's a different time of year. You're eating something different, and like I said, we always make a joke that the spring flush of grass, which we're kind of getting to the peak of that now, so things are starting to head out, is like rocket fuel. The cattle go from a drier hay, and not saying it's lower quality, but you're wanting to make that hay at a decent quality, but then you take it to where you've put them out to a buffet at this point, and they can have all they want whenever they want it. So
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys have, I don't know why you need me, right? I mean, as an agronomist, you guys, you're doing excellent. You've got this great experiences from your operations. You're doing what you need to do. The one thing I would say about height management is there's some excellent research, and the internet is powerful in this, and some excellent videos. Dr. Ray Smith at Kentucky had some excellent work that basically showed if you take an orchard grass crown, that big clump, and you graze it from 4 inches down to 1 inch, after a week, that 1 inch crown is back to 4 inches, where that 4 inch crown is about 15 inches, right? It's an amazing difference of how long that takes.
So this, and I loaded the gun and fired the bullets on this one, but we're going to talk about that from a hay standpoint. So one of the things that I see, and I strive to push producers that have grass hay is now the disc bind is a popular way to mow hay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Disc mower, disc bind. I mean, we're getting away from the hay bonds, the sickle bar hay bonds. The problem is a lot of the disc binds have a tendency to come from the factory or to sit very low to the ground. Okay, I think it's good to go back, measure your header height, get your header cut in that leaving that 3 inches or almost 4 inches of stubble. If you're cutting your hayfield and you can see the dirt, you've cut it too close, and we want to get that backed up because you're going to see a quicker rate of return. No different than grazing livestock and eating them down below that, because I think that's one thing. You're cutting that too low. It takes that much longer to come back. You're going to promote weed growth because you're opening the canopy up. You want to manage your weeds. Get yourself something that closes the canopy in fast. Leaving a little bit between cuttings. Leaving an extra inch or two isn't leaving hay in the field. It does you a lot of good, and I really push that with people. Like if you're going out and you're scalping the ground because you want that field to look super clean and super tight, that's an aesthetics standpoint, but it is not good for your overall production of hay.
So an easy thing that I kind of challenge people to do with that is go out, mow it 4 inches, mow it 3 inches, and then go somewhere else that you've mowed shorter. And you can buy these infrared thermometers, or you can get a thermometer.
Oh, the ground salt, yeah.
Look at the temperature, right? And so when we start thinking about, they've warned me don't be too scientific, so I promise I won't be. But when we look at these cool season grasses, which is predominantly what we have with the orchard grass and the fescue and the timothys and the bromes, when that soil gets above 80 degrees, we start to see it slow down. When it gets 95 plus, it starts to lose root material. It starts to lose its tillering. And so when it's 100 degrees and that sun is straight up, and it is just blaring down, that is where those solar receptors, and that is where that extra couple inches of grass really saves you. And people don't always think about how much that little amount can save them soil temperature.
It's like a blanket for the ground is really what it is.
And soil moisture is incredible too. And when we're talking about July or August and we haven't seen rain in 2 weeks, it's amazing how much of that transpiration and stuff you can save in there by some cover. So I won't push that too hard, but think about that when
if you get greedy at the cutting side, you're going to lose it on the end because it's not going to come back, and it's not going. It's going to be stunted, and you are going to get weeds. But they talk to you too because weeds will only grow in optimal situations. So if you got some weeds in an area, you got to figure out what those weeds like. And it's probably telling you really need magnesium, you need this, you need that, you need something, and those weeds won't grow then.
And that's just it too. And we could get down. Well, like I said, we could get down that avenue on that. But if you're starting to get undesirable, forbs and weeds in your hay fields, that's a great time to call a guy like Justin, who's an agronomist that could take a look at it, or call us at the conservation district. Have that conversation to go out and see, because a weed here and there in a hayfield is not detrimental to overall quality of it. But when you start getting where you can calculate that to a percentage and say, okay, well, this stands, we're getting this is 70% grass and 30% milkweed and dogbane. Now we're getting to where there's a problem at that point. Okay, so there's some some techniques. There's some chemical management you could do. There's some fertility management, maybe just a crop rotation at that point, or interseeding, some things that you can challenge at. I've seen that become more of a problem with broadleaf weeds, though, and this is where this all ties together, on places that the hay is mowed too close to the ground. Yeah. That is the first line of defense on that. A lot of that stuff comes in and gets, because seeds will spread, and a lot of those invasive type of species like to seed close to the soil surface. So if you have an open canopy, they don't require to be seeded at a low depth. So they're going to just spread and pass at that point.
So, gentlemen, let me tell you that I knew this was going to go fast. And, we may have to pick a date a month from now and maybe do another show. But I will tell you that, everything we're talking about is important to practice best management practices because it's going to help your pocketbook. It's going to make your animals better. Some people sell hay. It's going to make your hay better and more desirable to buy. We sold some haulage bales, and the guy who got it said, "Man, what kind of wrapper you got? That wrapper is really making it tight, and I don't see very much mold." Right. So that was a compliment that I never even expected.
And one thing to touch on with that too is we talked about testing. We're talking about testing the soil and applying nutrients. On the tail end, get a forage sample done. I mean, I think that tells the story on a lot of things too. Group your bales like where you made them, and for a couple dollars per cutting, at the end of the day, talk about getting a forage sample done. Talk to a nutritionist. Talk to, I think Penn State. You can send them to Penn State, correct?
So forage samples, we don't actually do analysis for that. We recommend a few other labs. Dairy One would be one in Ithaca. Cumberland Valley Analytical Services, Rock River, labs would be another one. And so like there's a lot to that, right? Soil sampling is a little more straightforward in the interpretation than what forage sampling is. But we can tell a tremendous amount about our soils also from our forages, and we can tell about our baling practices and our agronomic practices and how hard Daryl's out here running his rake in the ground by our forage analysis. We can tell a lot about what you're doing by looking at that. And the last thing I will say is, regardless of any of the stuff we've talked about, whether it's weeds or it's regrowth or it's baleage, the most challenging thing that you are going to have to do is better agronomic practices. And most people want something easy to fix their problems, and it's not easy, right? It's changing the way you do your rotational grazing. It's changing how you cut your hay. It's changing a lot of these things, your fertility management. Those are going to be this night and day type transition over 2 to 3 years, not this single herbicide application, not this single seeding, not this single application of a forage. And that's where it becomes a challenge. You have to want to do better, not this quick Band-Aid.
So obviously there's no way we have even scratched the surface of some of this. So listen, if this program has tickled your fancy and you need to get some more information, Dustin, give them the information on how they get in contact with you, and you can give them links that they can follow up on some of this. Same thing with you, Perry.
Yeah, absolutely. So my office is in Waynesburg at 26 West High Street downtown. But I live in Fayette County, so it's easy for me to get out. My phone number is 724-207-2009. That's my office, and I try to stay out of the office as much as possible and on farms. So call me when you need me, and I'll call you back as soon as I can.
Thank you.
Okay, and for me here, Pierce, we're at 10 Nickman Plaza. We're the Fayette County Conservation District. Like I said, 10 Nickman Plaza. Lamont Furnace. The phone number is 724-438-4497. And I try to get to farms as much as I can, but that's about a 50-50 for me.
So to the listening audience, these gentlemen are both accessible. They want to come out into the field. They want to help farmers. So it's up to you to pick up the phone and make a phone call. Pierce, you have something you want to mention about soil conservation, and I got to close on the Farm Bureau. And
yeah, absolutely.
We'll be back.
Just real quick here, kind of away from what we were talking about, the Fayette County Conservation District is having an event June 8th. Saturday, June 8th at the Fayette County Fairgrounds. It's from 10 to 3. It's open to the public. It's called Wild About Nature. We do a little of everything. We'll have some livestock exhibits, some animal shows. We have presentations, a little bit of everything. It encompasses anything that has to do with conservation, agriculture, wildlife, and anything in between. It's to call to pre-register. It's not required to pre-register, but we are doing some pre-registration for some gift card drawings. Is from May 28th to June 5th. But like I said, it's open to the public, free to get in, and it's on June 8th. If anybody has any questions, call the Conservation District at 438-4497. This is our third year having it. We had well over about 1,000 people last year, and we're very excited to do this. Thank you, too, to the Fayette County Farm Bureau for helping us out this year. They've decided to chip in and help us a little bit with some of this, so we
Everything
greatly appreciate
agriculture,
it.
Pierce. Everything agriculture.
We greatly appreciate it, and like I said, if anybody has any questions, give us a call.
So, a last little plug for you is that when you were on the show, you talked about the availability of certain kind of machines that they could use to, and we won't go into that right now. But call either of these two guys if you have any questions, and you're not going to regret that. Some of the things that are going on currently, there's a farmers market in Uniontown that will be starting up on the 25th of May. I think they're going to make a big deal out of this. Listen, agriculture is number one in the state and number one in the county. And for those of you out there who realize that the supply chain in food is no different than the supply chain and everything else, it's good to have another resource. Kelly Trott's doing a great job with the Uniontown. There's 5 in Fayette County. The Farm Bureau is trying to make sure that they get the correct PR, and so people who want to buy directly from the farmer, the farm-to-table aspect, we want to get that out and get information. The county commissioners are working on this, so it's a great day for agriculture. Fayette County Farm Bureau has their spring-summer picnic. It's going to be at Washington Park on June the 9th. If you want to find out more about the Farm Bureau, please come. You can visit. If you eat food, you should be a member of the Farm Bureau. And that's what my state president tells me anyway. So the Fayette County Farm Bureau Facebook page is great for information. It's Fayette County, Pennsylvania Farm Bureau Facebook page. We have a golf outing. We're co-sponsoring with Jason White's MOA and Wild Acres. It's going to be on July 13th at Cedar Brook. Our 5th annual Farm-to-Table Dinner is going to be on September the 19th at the Grayson House. Information will be coming out for that. And our meetings occur the first Wednesday of every month at the Fayette County at Fayette County Fairgrounds, which Pierce can, they're very gracious to allow us that space. So we have, about a minute? You guys want to close out with anything you think you missed, or?
No, I mean, just kind of heads up. I know that it has been a little bit challenging. It seems like we get rain every couple days, but I don't know. And I just a reminder to everybody, it's early yet. I mean, a lot of guys are worried about that it's getting late, but the window's good here on planning. And I think one of the things too is, and Justin can reinforce this, is the planning conditions. I think are more important than so much more than the calendar date at that point.
It's like you can read my mind. I think we're not to the point to hit the panic button yet, right? If I did this show a week from now, we might talk differently, or maybe 2 weeks. But remember, it's mid-May. Be patient. Spring and summer have been a little shorter, and we have a long fall. So be patient. Things will get better.
Special shout out and a thank you to Jason White, MOA, and Wild Acres for allowing us to be on this show to try to share some information with Fayette County farmers and beyond. I'm sure, gentlemen, we'll get back together again sometime soon. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great day. And Pierce, don't worry about that. Hey, we'll get it in.